I was actually just talking about this with a friend the other day. They were looking at my bio and everything that I've done. And I said, it's really simple. It's a one syllable word, and it's yes. It's just go out there and put yourself in situations so you could say yes to things, right? Because if you say no, then I can tell you what the outcome is. The outcome is you're not going to do anything. And if you just start saying that word yes to whether it's performing with a wedding band or performing at a bar or whatever the situation is, but just by saying yes, you open that door.
Welcome back to Second Verse, the podcast for artists who are picking their music back up, whether that means a comeback, a second act, or finally saying yes to the thing they put off for someone else's paycheck. Today's guest has been playing saxophone since 4th grade in a New Jersey elementary school, when a kid just going around the room happened to land on the one instrument that fit. 2 decades later, he's shared stages with Derek Trucks, Ja Rule, The Four Tops, and Bernard Pretty Purdy. And he spent 15 years as a full-time music educator before making a decision this year that he says is one of the only times in his life he's actually taken his own advice. We're talking about walking away from a stable teaching career in his 40s, starting his own record label after labels told him he didn't fit anywhere, and the one-word philosophy, literally one syllable, that he says explains almost everything good that's happened in his career. Plus, we get into his new record, Right Here, Right Now, and the story behind his reimagined cover of Oye Como Va with Santana's longtime lead singer, Tony Lindsay. I'm Becky Boyland, and this is Nick Stefanacci's Second Verse. Welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for being with me today on Second Verse.
Becky, thank you so much for having me. And, just looking forward to getting to know you and talking a bit.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to start with everyone's origin story. When did you first fall in love with music?
I grew up around music my entire life. My whole family on my dad's side were musicians, local musicians, part of the local in New Jersey. So I grew up with music from, day one in the womb, I would say. My father's a guitarist, and so I was heavily influenced by, the Beatles, growing up and Cream and, just classic rock stuff, But in 4th grade in New Jersey, that's where the public school system starts their band programs or whatever. And it was funny, because most kids, the conversation with the parents are, well, do you want to do bands? What do you think? And, my house, it was just, well, you're doing bands. So what instrument do you want to play? And I was really blessed that I had, just an amazing teacher in elementary school. And he became one of my close mentors. We'll get more into that later on, but, he was an upright jazz bass player, studied at University of Miami with the great Eddie Gomez. I got to start music with him. And in Jersey, you kind of go around the room and you kind of pick what instrument you think you want to try, because it looks a certain way to you or whatever. And for some reason, I picked the saxophone and we tried it, and it was the right fit. From early on, I just had a natural gift for it. And here we are all these years later.
I'm a band kid too. So
yeah,
there was no question. I wanted to play probably several years earlier than I was allowed to join, but cool. Yeah, there's just something so amazing about that.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome.
So where did that lead you into your musical journey?
Wow. Prior, when we get to like the second verse part of this, I was a full-time music educator in another life. And it really was just a natural calling for me, because when I was a student in school myself, I never really took to academics. I did well, but I wasn't like my sisters. I wasn't like my cousins who I grew up with, I was, very close with. So music was really my saving grace, was really my way out. In 5th grade, I played a solo with the choral teacher. So it was just like sax and piano. And so that was like my first step into the spotlight as a really young artist. And then in 6th grade, I was able to start studying privately with another one of my mentors. And, from that's where it totally exploded for me. In 6th grade, I also did the middle school talent show. And so I was one of like the few 6th graders selected for it. And I played a Charlie Parker piece with the choral director at the middle school. She played piano. She accompanied me on piano. I played I played some like, real bebop jazz. And the funniest thing that, one of the things that hooked me on music was after that performance, an eighth grade girl approached me in the hallway and said, oh my God, what a great job. I never expected that, and I was like, whoa, someone like, an eighth grade girl is talking to me. So right there, I would say, this is cool, man. There's a lot of power to this thing. And then, it just really kind of, bloomed and flourished in high school where, I just had so many opportunities to play music and play solos and, be in that spotlight or whatever, that it really just captivated my life. And I'm forever blessed because it's taken me around the world,
Oh, that's amazing. And I love that story about the eighth grade girl. And when you get some of those accolades from not only your peers, but the kids that are older is just, intoxicating.
Yeah. 100%. Because I don't think she talked to me the rest of the school year, It was just after that show that night, it was like accepted that she could talk to me or whatever. But that was something that just stayed in the back of the brain. I said, all right, yeah, this is cool. This is something I could do.
So then you found yourself teaching.
Yeah. I studied classical saxophone and music education in my undergrad. And so it wasn't a choice for me financially to just go into music full time. I had to pay back student loans and grow up, become an adult. And so that same teacher, J. Chuck Sastre, that I had in fourth grade, he helped me get my first teaching job in my old school district in Wayne, New Jersey. And so I got to teach at the high school that I graduated from, like right out of college. So that was bizarre.
Amazing.
Yeah. Really, really kind of bizarre. And then unfortunately that same year, we lost Chuck to pulmonary fibrosis. And he was 49 years old. He was
Wow.
young, and he took me to gigs when I was in high school. As a senior in high school, he called my parents like the night before a couple of times and said, hey, I'm leaving school, at lunch to go play a gig in the city. Can I sign Nick out because he's of age and take him with me to the gig and all that stuff? And those are experiences that I don't think many high school students have. And so he really took me under his wing. And then in college, he started to call me for gigs. It was, so special. And then I just lost him so young. But that really led to philanthropy becoming a part of my career, which is something that I hold so dear. Here I am, a 22-year-old, and I'm at his wake. And I didn't plan any of this, but the pastor asked if someone wanted to come up and speak. And I just stood up. It was like second nature, and I had no idea what I was going to say once I got up to the pulpit. And so I started talking about our relationship. And then sooner or later, the head of the jazz department at William Patterson University, which is a big time jazz program, and it happens to be located in my hometown of Wayne, New Jersey. He happened to be there because he knew Chuck as a professional. And I happened to know Dr. Dempsey because I did their high school like jazz programs in the summer. And I saw him there, and all of a sudden it just came out like I looked and I said, Dr. Dempsey, I'm sure William Patterson would love to host a benefit concert to start a memorial scholarship for Chuck. And he couldn't say no because we're in a church, like how do you say no to that? So I painted him into a real bad corner, and that's where my philanthropy started. And that was amazing, that concert. I had a list of a lot of Chuck's friends and musician friends that he performed with over the years, and I called them all up. And this was like, really before the internet really kicked in. So it was phone calls, and I said, hey, we're doing this benefit concert at William Patterson. Do you want to be a part of it? And I think we had something like 8 or 9 acts of musicians perform, and we raised over $20,000 that night. And that scholarship is still handed out on a yearly basis to graduating high school seniors who are going on, to study the arts in some capacity. And so that was kind of my first dive into philanthropy. Those are some of the best moments of my career is when you can give back and when you can create something that truly has an impact,
Yeah, and what an incredible legacy to
Yeah,
continue to build that and keep that going.
for
Do you
sure.
continue to do concerts around that for fundraising each year?
We haven't done one in a while, and it's just harder and harder. Dempsey is not at William Patterson anymore, so it's harder to get the room. And then, people move away or they stop performing. So we haven't touched that in a while, but it's still there, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and to be able to have it continue to stay funded is a great legacy as well. So
Absolutely.
that's really powerful.
Yeah, for sure, for
Oh,
sure.
that's awesome. So then talk about as you got into teaching or maybe your pivot out of teaching, what did that look like?
Oh, well, I mean, I was teaching for 15 years in New Jersey. And that pivot out of teaching was literally this past school year where I resigned in January to pursue music full time. But also it's funny because, I've been thinking about this a lot since we decided to do this podcast. And it's one of the few times in my life that I've actually taken my own advice because, to my students, and I've had so many great students over the years. Oh my God. A lot of my teaching as a music educator was really about building them up as people and young adults and how to survive the world. Because, my whole philosophy, especially in public school, was if I had one student graduate every year to go on to music, that's a success, So how do I reach those 99% other kids who are doing this because it's a hobby, it's a passion, or they're doing it because they like me as a teacher, which is like so many of those kids that you find out over the years, And so how do you connect with them and how do you help them grow and become just better citizens? And so a lot of my teaching, we would just talk about things. And, so many times in my life, telling students and preaching to them, I would say, look, sometimes you have to make those hard decisions and do what's best for you. And that was exactly what happened this past school year, where I had to take a serious mental health break and make a really tough decision for myself for a change, which is, as an educator, we always find ourselves doing things for our students. And that's a beautiful thing, right? That's so amazing. But I had to do something for myself. And it was one of the hardest decisions to walk away from education. And I hated how it ended. Briefly, my school district hired a supervisor that was completely not qualified. And unfortunately, instead of her being a leader, she became a bully. And I called my sisters because I was really contemplating this thing. And I said, look, I'm not going to be bullied in my 40s, by someone who has no accreditation to be in this role. And it could have went both ways, right? She could have been a fantastic supervisor who understands that the music people know what they're doing, let them do their job. And then just aid and supplement if we needed something. But it got to the point where she was harassing me about taking too long to set up a stage for a concert. You need to be back in the room teaching faster. Well, I'm sorry that I need to move all the equipment in the band room to the stage. And, the students helped out a lot, but, a lot of things I would have to do on my own or reset because it just wasn't how it had to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that stuff takes time. And it's, it's not like it took me a week. It would take me 2 days to set the stage up for a concert. And it would take me a day to break it down. That's not that much time. And so when you get pushed like that by someone who has no clue about it, I had to take my own advice. And it's something, that I struggle with even to today because it's still really fresh, but the long-term health benefits and mental benefits are going to be far outweigh all this, this short period of time of just, feeling that kind of grief, for leaving your students,
It's such a hard pivot to make. No matter what change we go through, whether it's career or other life changes, all of them are traumatic, even if they're good.
Right.
And so it's that transition. I remember learning about that actually when I was probably in high school, that you did an inventory of all the stressors in your life, and I'm like, oh man, even then my life seemed stressful as a student, and now that just sticks in my mind that yes, every time there's a change, that change is still stressful, even if it's the good thing that I want to do.
Right. Exactly. So we're just in the middle of it, but when we talk again in another year or a couple years, it's going to be a different story. And that's the beautiful part of it.
Yeah, I imagine there's a lot of sort of imagining or predicting what is going to come next, but I also imagine just leaning into the music is so powerful and impactful.
Yeah, I mean, throughout this whole like time frame of when I was trying to make this decision and this life impact, I really was able to reconnect with my faith. I always refer to it as like the big guy upstairs, and because a lot of my family members and my friends, they said, you're going to stop teaching. Like you're crazy. You must be crazy. Like there's benefits. You have a steady income. It's all this great stuff. And I would just, I would tell them, I said, look, I can't believe that I've been given this opportunity to fail. I just can't believe that in the deepest, darkest places of my soul, I just, it's that feeling like, okay, yeah, this is a really tough decision, but you have to make it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like clearing the plate so that you can see what comes next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my God. Teaching and being an educator will be a part of my life forever. And it's just how I try to help people and approach people. It's, tell me what's going on. How can I help you a little bit? And we just kind of go from there.
Oh, amazing. That's wonderful. We'll be back with more after this break. Do you cringe when someone asks for your website? The problem usually isn't the design, it's that your message isn't clear. Attitude Creativity helps indie artists and creatives get crystal clear on their brand story and can build a website around it that actually grows your audience. I'm Becky Boyland, Story Brand Certified Guide, fellow artist, and your secret weapon to finally sounding like yourself online. Book a free discovery call at attitudecreativity.com. Hey, I'd like to share with you something really special I'm working on. I bet you've been sitting on songs, maybe for years. You know how to write, but finishing them, that part feels out of reach. I get it. I've been there. And I built She Produces Music because I believe women don't need to wait for someone else to bring their music to life. It's a coaching program for female songwriters who are ready to learn music production in Ableton Live and finally hear what their songs are actually supposed to sound like. Find out if it's right for you at sheproducesmusic.com. So talk about now that you are in this new journey, what is that looking like from a music standpoint, and what do you have happening now and coming on the horizon?
Yeah, I've just been so blessed with my career overall, that it's just great. I'm getting to spend a lot more time with my mother who's dealing with some health issues. So that's just a win, and it's funny because it's like the small things that probably would have been a really big pain in my butt if I was still teaching, like taking her to the grocery store or going and picking up her medicine or, taking her to doctors. But like now that I have this time and this freedom, it's more moments to spend with her, and, that won't last forever. So I'm trying to enjoy all of those moments, even though they add stress to my life and all that stuff. But musically, there's so much good stuff. My last album just came out in February, I believe. And so we're just releasing a bunch of singles off of it. I have a bunch of festivals coming up that I'm performing. I'm currently finishing my next album already, so that'll be ready for 2027 to be released. So there's so much good energy and just so many things to come, that it's really just exciting, and once it kicks in, it's going to be a blast. I'm happy for that.
Oh, amazing. So talk about your music process and how you develop your pieces and the singles that you're working on, the albums that you're working on. What does that creative space look like?
Yeah, I'll go back to like my education days of being a student, where just academics, it just didn't click, but the creative stuff was always kind of lingering or lurking in the background. I didn't know really how to access it. And then as a young musician, I was told so many times by so many different people that I'm not good enough or I'll never make it, whatever. And that was like college auditions and all that world of nonsense. And so I said, well, cool. There's a lot of doubt there. So why don't we try to start writing my own music? Because people can't stop me from playing my stuff. They may not think I'm good enough to be in such a band or whatever, or a program, but they can't stop me if I write my own stuff. And so that's kind of really where it started. And it started in high school because I would sit down and Chuck would play piano for me and I would just play blues. Right. And so in high school, I started to write my own blues melodies, right? Because you don't have to worry about the chord progression. The chord progression is already set for you. Yeah. So you find a key that you like to play in and you start writing new heads. And so it kind of really started there, right? And then as an undergraduate student, studying music and classical performance, my writing really had a chance to explode because of the classical side. I was performing in like a saxophone quartet and I had the opportunity to write my own original saxophone quartet piece. And so that was just like a different side of my creative stuff coming out. And then I started to write more and more in like the jazz and blues vein in college. And then after college, I had the great honor of playing for a couple of years and touring with a doo-wop group called Emil Stucchio and the Classics. And they were based out in Long Island. And I had to go audition for the role and all that stuff. But those were some of the best years of playing in my life because I was around all these older doo-wop guys who have been on the scene, since the 50s and 60s. And they've been through it all, and they were still making music later in life, still enjoying performing. And they would just have the best stories about, what it was like touring in the 60s on a bus and not making a penny off a show because, the booking agent or the promoter stole it from them. And, they didn't have lawyers back then for that stuff. So, it was just a really good awakening about the music industry and how it really is. But it was also during that experience with that music director where he kind of really started to push me to write more of my own stuff. And then, so I wrote my first album and that's called 26 Years. And then I recorded it at his studio, out in Long Island. And once I stepped in the studio as an artist, it just hit me like, this is really what I want to do. And I love being in the studio. I love being able to create. I love writing. I love pushing the envelope of what I write. And I think if you go back and check out my entire discography, which is pretty lengthy already for this part of my life, every single album is going to have a different sound to it, a different feel to it. Growing up listening to the Beatles, I think that had a really big inspiration on my style of writing because listening from one Beatles album to the next, I mean, it's like, holy smoke, what did they do and why is it so different, And to me, that's what being an artist is about. I don't want to stay stagnant with my sounds. I don't want to stay stagnant with my creativity. And so every album, I'm trying to push it some way, some form, somehow to make it just a little bit different, a little bit fresher and keep me, myself and I on my toes as a performer and as an artist. A few years back, I was approached by a contemporary classical pianist to compose some new contemporary classical duets for saxophone and piano. And I said, yeah, count me in. This is amazing. And so I got to flex like all these classical training muscles that I haven't used, in like decades. And I mean, I'm in love with the stuff I wrote for that because it's just so different and so fresh sounding to me. And then we had a chance to record it and we're trying to book some shows to actually perform some of that stuff. So it's just really has been a blessing. And I'm just so lucky for all of it. I've worked hard, but just so lucky to have all of these experiences.
And that's such a great example for a lot of indie artists who think they either have to stay in one lane or they feel like they have to follow all these different paths and none of them are necessarily who they are as an artist. But by doing it on a project by project basis, there's, I imagine, a through line, even though there's so much difference in creativity and you don't get bored either. And that just sounds like such a wonderful approach. And I love how you also took the criticism early on and said, oh, fine, I'll just do me. And I think a lot of artists, have those same stories. I have stories like that as well of, oh, maybe just stick to your instrument and maybe not sing. And I'm glad I didn't listen to that. I mean, I heard it in the moment. It didn't feel great. But as time went on, I'm like, you know what? I don't think they knew what they were saying and they didn't know what was coming. And I'm glad that I just leaned into doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think while I was an educator, I think that was one of the things that I really tried to preach to my students is, who am I to say that you're not good enough? Like, who am I?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I have degrees, I have albums, whatever, but man, like you're still just like such a young sapling in this world. Like you need to keep on pushing and growing and find what you love to do and then chase that relentlessly and don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough because they have no clue. They have no clue what's good enough in this world. And so I think from my experiences of hearing no all those times, then when I had the chance to say yes to kids, it was really kind of like, yeah, this is what feels right to me, is just try to inspire them, just be great and just go be you. And then as an artist, I mean, I've had, different like record labels and stuff like that. Well, yeah, you're good, but like, you don't really fit in the smooth jazz world or you don't really fit in the pop world or you don't fit in the contemporary jazz world. Like, so we can't sign you to anything. All right. So then I started my own record label. So Sweet Lion Music puts out all my records. Again, it's that mentality. Cool. Like if you don't think it's good enough, that's on you. And we'll shake hands and we'll walk away, mutual friends. And, at the end of the day, we'll see where it stacks up and where it piles up. But I'm going to keep on just doing what feels good for my soul. And that's kind of, I think, as an artist, I think that's really how you have to approach it. You have to do what feels good for your soul.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really interesting that when we talk about so many other subjects that we want people to learn and develop over time, that there is that concept of development.
Right.
But when it comes to art, so many times people are just like, well, you haven't arrived. And so this apparently is all the further that this person can go,
Right.
and it's absolutely crazy because you can clearly develop. We see people develop over time. And one of the things that, whether it's a particular instrument or the voice, it's just like everyone assumes it's either you have it or you don't. And
Right.
it's like, well, how do you think I got this far? It didn't come in a vacuum. So there's definitely more that has to happen. And so it's really silly, I guess, that that's the way that we tend to look at it broadly in society. And I think that's the other really amazing thing about artists like the Beatles, who they didn't really sound like anybody else either. They just created a new genre, and a few more,
Right,
to be honest. So that's the artists that we remember are the ones who broke all the rules and did something that was completely new that no one had heard before. And so, trying to just sound like everybody else feels old and dated, and it's safe but not safe because it's an easy way to disappear into the horizon or basically the giant ocean of music that's being put out on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like you said, the Beatles, they broke the rules, and then if you look back through music history, the rules weren't there for Mozart. The rules weren't there for Beethoven. The rules came after, right? The rules came after when they went back and listened to it, they transcribed it, and then they studied it and they put the rules to it. And this is why Mozart sounds this way, because he did this and this and that. But he wasn't thinking about that when he was writing. He was just writing, right? And like you said, and that's what really the artists that we remember, that's what they do. They color outside those lines, and that's how it works for them. That's how they get noticed, right? And so, I think a lot of it is just because of the silly music industry, and they just want cookie cutters because they could rinse, repeat, and sell, or whatever their lingo is. But that doesn't have a lasting effect, right? And I think as an artist, I mean, I want my music to be listened to for a long time after I'm gone. Hopefully, that's the goal. I don't want it to be out there doing nothing. So you keep on pushing, you keep kind of redefining yourself as an artist. And it comes into that thing of like just not being satisfied, and I think that's just something that people have or they don't have, and I think, artists that constantly push the boundaries, they're just not satisfied. And I think as an educator, I would always relate, music to sports because the comparisons are so there, but we separate them so much, which is so wild. And, you just look at the great athletes over time, they're never satisfied, right? That's why like you have Michael Jordans who win 5 championships or whatever, or you have Tiger Woods that win how many, because they're, it's just this relentless pursuit of perfection. And that's kind of how I treat my career. And hopefully it's the right path,
Yeah, I think that's a really great illustration. And there's, you're going to have me thinking about that now as far as overlapping those two areas. And there is that, not only that perfectionism, but the discipline to continue to pursue it. And that's always an interesting challenge for the indie artist who goes from hobbyist to professional, because there's a huge difference in how we treat our music when it's a hobby.
Right.
We squeeze it in when we can and we do it for fun and then we stop.
Right.
And there are so many other things that we have to do if we really want to make it a viable career. And the discipline behind that is what separates the hobbyist and the pro.
Right. Right. And I'm trying to figure out in my brain and how to better advertise music, but also create a better pipeline for young artists to succeed. Right. And again, like I taught for so many years and I was always using sports analogies because that's what everybody knows in this society, which is a little crazy, but it is what it is. Sports have done such a great way of creating a pipeline for young athletes to find success in college and then find, the professional leagues. And so there has to be a way in music to try to create that same pipeline and really give kids a chance, And so like I would always say to my students is, high school athletes that are good, they come in, they get scouted by, colleges to be recruited, right? There were no A&R reps coming to my high school concerts, but maybe there has to be, right? Maybe there has to be college scouts for Juilliard and college scouts for Manhattan School of Music, Berklee College of Music, whatever, to go around to high schools and actually scout talent to try to get them to their programs. There has to be a way to do it. And maybe one day I'll meet the right people and try to put that into place somehow. But there needs to be a way to do it because if sports can do it, why not the arts? The arts are just as important, if not more important for growth and educational and learning than sports are. And like I said, like I would tell my students all the time, I can't teach height and speed. Like you're either going to be 6'4" and be able to run a 40 or whatever they measure for their metrics. But I could teach anybody how to play a blues scale. It doesn't take size. It doesn't take strength. It's a little bit of finger coordination and I got you. And so there has to be a way to create a pipeline to help kids find more success in the arts so it becomes a little more prevalent in society,
That really goes back to what you said just about going into college. Right. And this has been said several times on this podcast that you had to grow up and get a job. And that's what we're told. Music is something that you can always be in an ensemble. You can always do these things on the side, but it gets pushed away unless you're going to be an educator because of that same line of like, you got to go get a job.
Right.
And it's like, well, this could be a job. This can be a job.
Yeah.
And so it is really interesting because I know that, especially for athletes that go on to college and play in college and then don't get drafted, it's sort of like, what do I do now? And
they're lost.
And of course, they have to go get a job. That's why they have their other degree. But for the musician, many times that feeling of loss and what do I do now starts right after high school because, again, they can be in an ensemble, but like you said, there's no path. And that's profoundly sad.
It is because I mean, you're just stripping away so much from kids, and they're just trying to find their potential. Right. And so there has to be a way to create a pipeline. And so that's that's definitely gonna be something I'm going to start thinking about, because now I have a little bit more time to kind of go on these, adventures in my mind.
Yes, yes, that's for sure. So for those who are at a point in their life now where they're like, maybe I should make the leap. Maybe
Mm.
this is something that has to go from hobby to pro.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to them?
I was actually just talking about this with a friend the other day, and they were looking at at my bio and everything that I've done, and I said it's really simple. It's a one syllable word, and it's yes. It's just go out there and put yourself in situations so you could say yes to things, right? Because if you say no, then I can tell you what the outcome is. The outcome is you're not going to do anything. And if you just start saying that word yes to whether it's, performing, with a wedding band or performing at a bar or whatever, whatever the situation is. But just by saying yes, I mean, you open that door and you step through that door and you're not sure what you're going to find on the other side. But it's a hell of a lot better than saying no and just closing that door shut in your face. So I think that's really the best and easiest advice is you just have to say yes to things. And, some things are not going to go your way and they're going to be bad experiences, but all those experiences lead to being an artist, right? If you don't have the downs, then you don't know how to celebrate the ups. And then if you don't have the downs, how can you ever write a sad ballad? If you don't have that experience, you can't write it. So you need to go through all these emotions and just say yes. And trust me, like some of the craziest things are going to happen and you're going to say, oh my God, how is that possible? And it's really just from saying the word yes. So that's my advice.
I love that. And I was thinking, oh yes, you're turning these no's into opportunities, but I love it even better the way that you said it, because basically you're turning a no into material.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I mean, there's been so many gigs that I've said yes to over the years that I shouldn't have or whatever, but they led to something else. Undoubtedly they led to something else. And that's just such a win. And you can't replicate that, right? You can't replicate that by looking at your phone and counting your streams or counting your followers. Take all that data and those metrics and just throw them out the window because it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're either going to write really great music or be able to perform really great music, or you're not. And having followers and stream, I didn't grow up with it, so I'm late to that whole party. So I don't really care about any of that party because it's not real. It's all fictional, So I say get away from the phone, put down the 2-inch screen and just go live life. Just go be outside.
Yeah. And make connections, and the people that are 2 or 3 people further away, you don't know who that's going to be. There's no way that you can even predict who that's going to be. And it's those serendipitous moments that a lot of times just totally change everything.
Yes.
So you can't, like you said, you can't manufacture that because you just don't know it's even available.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, you just have to say yes. It's cool. It's just that simple.
So talk a little bit about what music is coming up next. And I know you're doing singles off of this current album. So share a little bit about that.
Sure. So, the current release is called Right Here, Right Now. I thought that title just worked perfectly for where I am in my world. I didn't plan that, but it, again, it's just like this thing that it just came out of nowhere and it just worked. I said, okay, that's perfect for where I am. So, there's some really great music on this album. The last single that we just released a couple weeks ago is, the famous Tito Puente, Oye Como Va. And, if I do a cover of a song, I really try to expand it and make it my own. Right. And so I was really fortunate to get the great Tony Lindsay to sing it. And, if you don't know who Tony is, Tony was Santana's lead singer for the past 20 years. And so I called Tony up. I said, Tony, man, we're doing Oye. And he, I wish it was a video call because I'm sure his face just going, oh, nah! But so I could only imagine what his face was, what his facial expression was. But I said, yeah, we're doing Oye, but it's going to be different, man. It's going to be something like you've never sang it before. And he's like, well, Nick, I've only sang it one way for 20 years, around the world. So how do you want me to sing it? And so it was funny because if you listen to the first chorus, right? And it's just a chorus. There's no verses in it, right? It's just the Coda,
Yeah.
like a typical Spanish thing. It's brilliant. I said, Tony, like, I want to do the first chorus different. I want you to kind of like almost like vocalist the melody, right? And take a lot of freedoms, a lot of expression and make it different. And then subsequently, every time we get back to the chorus, it'll be more of the traditional route. But like, just give me like one chorus where it's not Oye Como Va, right? And so he was having a really hard time. And that's like the fun stuff of being a producer, right? Because it's like, man, this guy has Grammy Awards. He has, gold records, platinum records with Santana. He's been all over the world. How do I get him to free up and do what I need him to do? And so what ended up happening was I ended up just recording a couple of like saxophone lines that I thought could work, And I said, Tony, now just vocalize this, strip out my saxophone and make your voice do this. And he did it, man. And he did it. And I love what he did with the first chorus. I think it's really fresh and original. And then I added some horns to it and I kind of changed the arrangement a little bit just to make it my own. So I love this version that we did. And I'll be at the Asbury Jazz Festival in Asbury Park, New Jersey. So we're going to do it live and it's just going to be a lot of fun for the crowd. So I'm excited about that. And then, the rest of the album kind of basically encapsulates my approach as an artist, right? So there's like some funky stuff in there that's definitely like a James Brown, Maceo Parker type thing. I have a beautiful ballad, that I wrote as like a lullaby, and there's lyrics to it. I just haven't done the vocal version yet. So I'll release that later as a separate vocal rendition. And then, there's like a lot of Quincy Jones influence on it. And people always ask me like, how do you describe your sound or whatever? And so about a year ago, someone kind of came up with dubbing me like the Prince of Soul Jazz. And this was a club owner after he heard me. And I really loved that phrase, right? And it really makes sense for me because I always say that my artistry is kind of like a Quincy Jones mashed up with Maceo Parker. So a lot of like orchestrated pop hook songs, just with a saxophone, like a funky saxophone, soulful, lead. And so I think like that Prince of Soul Jazz really kind of works as who I am as an artist. And Quincy is just one of those people that, he studied orchestration as a young person, and then he wrote for everybody. He produced everybody. And, obviously everybody knows his Michael Jackson stuff, but, his breadth of work is so astonishing. And that's what I try to emulate as an artist and a producer, right? Is how can we touch all these worlds and be great at all of them? And so that's kind of what I take into the studio when I write, is that kind of mantra, that kind of mindset.
That's incredible. Those influences are just phenomenal. So
yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So how can people keep up with you and find you on all the places?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way is just through my website. So nickstefanaccimusic.com. And that has all my social links. And I will be completely honest. If you follow me on Facebook and you message me on Facebook, I will eventually get to it. I'm way more proactive on my Instagram page. It's just easier for me for some reason. I don't know why. So if you want to reach out, feel free to do it on the Instagram page. If you do it on the Facebook, I will eventually get there, but I apologize because it's something that I just don't look at very often. There was a time I had a great chance of living in Europe for over a year and playing all throughout Europe. And while I was on that journey, I deleted all my socials. I said, you know what, like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm living in Europe. I just need to be here. I need to be present in this moment. And I mean, that was probably the worst thing I could do as an artist, delete your social media accounts. But, I just needed it. I needed it for my soul. And so when I got back to the States and I started to like really record and produce again, full time, everyone's like, oh man, you really need to start your socials again so you could start getting bookings for gigs and stuff. Cause that's all that these people care about, is like how many followers and all that nonsense. So like Facebook was the last one I started again. So that's why I just don't interact that much, but Instagram is probably the best. And yeah, you'll find like all my tour dates, ticket links, all that good stuff, latest videos, latest like interviews and, all that cool stuff.
Awesome. And we'll have everything in the show notes.
Cool.
And you make me nostalgic for when I was in college. I spent a semester in London, and the way that the email was set up for campus was on actual physical servers. And so we didn't have our own computers at that point.
Right.
And you didn't have to set a password because you were logging into your entire virtual, environment.
Right.
So nobody told me that I needed to set a password so that I could access it remotely. So I had no email for an entire semester, and it didn't, this was pre-social media, but I was kind of like, this is cool.
This is actually healthy. This is good. I agree.
I could not possibly do that now because my whole, life would shut down, but man, it's tempting.
I agree. And it was probably one of the best cleanses I ever did for my soul. It's just get away from all of that and just, again, be present, be in that moment and live, So yeah, but now like, whatever, there's consequences to everything you do,
It's true. A little simplicity would be great, but this is what it is. This is where we're at.
Exactly. Oh, that's so funny.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, Becky, it was my pleasure. And I hope we could do it again soon.
What stood out most for me in this conversation was Nick's record label story. When the industry kept telling him he didn't fit, not smooth jazz enough, not pop enough, not contemporary jazz enough, he didn't shrink the sound to fit their box. He started Sweet Lion Music and built his own lane. That's a brand lesson as much as it is a music lesson. If you're an indie artist trying to get a gatekeeper to say yes, and you keep getting a version of you don't fit, that's not always a sign to change who you are. Sometimes it's a sign your message needs its own category, not someone else's. Here's your actionable step this week. Pull up your artist bio or your website's homepage and ask, does this describe me by comparison to other artists? Or does it say clearly who I am and who this is for? If it's the former, that's your rewrite. And Nick's other piece of advice bears repeating. It's a one-syllable word, and it's yes. Say yes to the gig, the collaboration, the weird idea. You can't manufacture where it leads, but you also can't get there by staying home. If this episode moved you, hit subscribe and leave a review. It's the single best way to help another artist find their way back to the music. And now, here's Nick Stefanacci with Midnight Affair.